Serious, what supernatural event did you see that you're sure was real? This actually did end up being something real. When I was in high school, my parents and I moved into a new house with 2 floors and a basement. I was upstairs, and my parents were on the first floor. I usually stayed up way too late, as most high schoolers do, and during one of these late night sessions, I started hearing noises outside my bedroom, like footsteps and clanking and such. I asked my parents about it, and neither of them had been up in the night, and of course, they dismissed me when I told them what I heard. The noises continued at night for months. This was around the time those paranormal activity movies were big, so I swore it was demons because I never actually saw anything when I happened to get brave enough to investigate. My aunt stayed in the bedroom across the hall one night and confirmed hearing them too, so at least I knew I wasn't going insane. Then things got weirder. The noises got more intense, and stuff started getting moved or disappearing. My parents slowly started to believe something was happening in that house. One night, my dad was on a business trip, and it was just my mom and I watching TV downstairs, when there was this explosive noise in the basement. Something was definitely down there. However, instead of leaving the house or calling the cops like sane people, my mom stomps over to the basement door, flings it open, and yells into the darkness of the basement, "Get out of my house." I'll admit it was quiet that night after that. Eventually, we figured out that one of the storm windows on the basement was unlocked, and people had actually been coming into the house. So maybe not supernatural, but it was still scary. A lot of abandoned roads where I grew up. It was a small town where a lot of people started building before the economy went to shit in 2007, thus leaving a bunch of abandoned half-constructed houses and empty half-built roads leading to dead ends. It was the perfect place to drive to when I first got my license to smoke with buddies. We were in my car hanging out on an abandoned road when my car shut off, turning the lights off completely. We were in pitch darkness. I held my breath and hoped the car hadn't died on me, and turned the key. The car started right up and flashed the lights onto the dead end ahead. A man is dressed in a very old school suit, and top hat was standing there with a briefcase. We were in the middle of nowhere, no houses or anything for miles. It was 6 of us stuffed in this car. We all saw him. We all screamed. I never put a car in reverse so fast. By the time I adjusted myself to back out, he was gone. I was in my grandparents' kitchen with my cousin, talking about all the important things that 9-year-olds have to discuss. We were both seated in swivel chairs perpendicular to a hallway, which ended with a door on the left, to the cellar, and a door on the right, to the bathroom. Suddenly I see a white cat waltz across the hall from the cellar and into the bathroom. My cousin spins back around and stares at me, mouth open and eyes wide. She asks if I just saw the cat walk by, and I nod. The 2 of us get up and walk cautiously to the end of the hallway. The cellar door was closed and latched, and the bathroom was completely empty. I still have no idea what we saw, but it was creepy that we'd both seen the same thing. This isn't as scary as the stories that are already here, but I still think about it with the same shock factor as I had then. My friend was in the hospital for a surgery for her legs, and I went up there with a few friends to visit her, keep her company. While all of us were in there, her mom, and our 2 other friends, just sitting around talking, this rocking chair just started moving. It's right by my friend in the hospital bed, just rocking as steadily as can be. I was freaked out. I stopped it, put my hand on it, and it started again. It wasn't rocking hard, just slowly like someone was sitting in it. I checked all around it, and there were no strings, there was no draft, no one was touching it even the slightest. There was no possible explanation for it to be moving. My friend's mom thought it was her father coming to see her daughter in the hospital. She was not freaked out in the slightest, didn't even question it. I still think about it all the time. A few years ago, me and my now ex-wife took our kids to Macon, North Carolina. The fort was used in both the Revolution and the Civil War. The fort is in a circle, and there is a hallway that connects the rooms going along the outer edge of the circle. My son kept looking around the corners laughing, playing peekaboo with things that aren't there, things like that. There was one area that was the surgery room. My son put his hands over his ears and his head down and cried when we tried to get him to go in. On the way out, he played one last game of peekaboo while walking in the courtyard and staring through the windows going to the back hallway. When that circle hallway ended, he had this kind of sad look on his face. We leave, then he jerks his arm away from me, turns around, and starts waving bye while laughing. A couple years ago, our dog died. Dog and I never got along. She didn't like me. I found her annoying. About 2 to 3 months after she passed away, I had a dream of being on the computer. I got up to use the bathroom, Left my room, and noticed that the lights in the windows upstairs were pure white. I didn't think anything of it, went downstairs, turned, looked down the hallway to the front door, and there was a bright white light pouring in. And sitting looking at the door was our dead dog. Like she wanted to go outside. So, I walk up the hall, and before I reach her, I say her name. She stands up, turns around, and runs over to me, doing that goofy little run she did whenever she saw someone she liked but hadn't seen in a while. I say hey and reach out to pet her, only to drop to my knees, give her a hug, say, "I'm sorry." She looked me, and then, I woke up. It was so upsetting because it finally hit me that she was dead, and I actually started to cry a bit. I don't believe in ghosts or visitations, but how intense it was. I think I believe she actually visited me in my dream that day. I experienced the same day twice. This was in 2nd or 3rd grade. I woke up and had my normal breakfast and noted that the same cartoons were playing as yesterday, but reruns weren't uncommon. Went to school and was confused why we were going over the same stuff as yesterday but didn't question it. The review wasn't uncommon. It wasn't until the end of the day we had an extra 20 minutes, so the teacher was playing guess the number 1 to 100, higher or lower, and you got a piece of candy if you won. So, the first round starts, and people make their guesses, and the first number was 50, and that's what it was yesterday. I remembered it was 49 after because it was 1 less, and then 99 because it was 1 less than 100, and then 35, which was her age. I told her I knew what she was picking because these were the numbers she picked yesterday. She said we didn't play this yesterday and thought I could see the board, so when it got to 35, she just scribbled on a piece of paper under her hand. When I told her it was 35, she turned white and said, "We're not playing anymore," and we never played again. Okay, so just a heads up, the first story was told to me by family that was around for it, the second I remember vividly. When I was young, like 2 to 3, my mother was walking me down the hallway to take a nap in her boyfriend's house. I stopped and told her, "I can't go there." When she asked why not, I told her, "'Cause Baba and Tim are sleeping there." Later, we found out that her boyfriend had killed his parents in the hallway, Barbara and Tim. When I was in 2nd grade, I was also going to after-school care at a church across the street. Every Friday, the ice cream man would come by. One day I was standing by the fence waiting for the ice cream man, when a man walked up. Well, he was more a shadow than a man, in a trench coat and fedora hat. I just stood there looking at him, and he kinda waved me over toward him, and I walked over. About the time I got over, a kickball kicked by a big 5th grader hit the fence about head level. I turned around to see who kicked it, and when I turned back, the shadow guy winked and disappeared. I think I met my guardian angel. In November of 2011, my mother had her 2nd major stroke and had to be put into long-term care, because we just couldn't give her what she really needed. My husband and I had recently moved out of state to his first military duty station. Luckily, it was only a 5-hour drive, and we were able to spend Thanksgiving with my dad that year. The house I grew up in had always been creepy. Over the years, we heard footsteps upstairs. When we were all downstairs, we saw shadows. Doppelgangers and things that just shouldn't have been there. I hated leaving my dad alone there, as he was ill. At that point, we didn't know it was cancer, just that he was slowing down. We convinced him to come to live with us, but couldn't bring him right away, because he had to sort through 30 years of accumulation, and we were living in a 1-bedroom house. We made plans to come back and bring him home with us around the first of the year 6 weeks later. My dad hated talking on the phone. He grew up before people really even had landlines and just never really liked phones. After we got home, he called me every single day. I knew something was up, because this was the man who would cuss out his cell phone until it stopped ringing. He wouldn't elaborate. He would just admit the house was getting weird. My husband was finally granted a few extra days leave after New Year, and we went to get my dad. The 2 nights we spent in that house are something I'll never forget. I honestly think whatever was in that house was pissed we were all moving out for good. Things would move on us, or be in a different box than we had packed it in. We were hearing strange knocks on the walls and faint voices in rooms nobody was in. We only slept there 2 nights. The first night, my husband and I were trying to go to sleep, and we started hearing stomping upstairs. The attic was huge, and it had previously been my room as a teenager. It has hardwood floors and has wooden enclosed steps. We both realized we never heard my dad go upstairs and were trying to figure out why he'd be up there in the middle of the night when we had decided to get his stuff up there in the daylight the next day. I got up and went out to the living room, and he was sitting on the couch. He asked me if the stomping had woken us up too. My husband joined us in the living room, and we all sat and talked for the next few hours. In that time, my dad finally told me the footsteps had become a nightly thing. It sounded like something frantically pacing back and forth where my bed used to be up there. It started the night he had started packing boxes and had spoken to me on the phone about the date we were coming to get him. He had started seeing the shadows darting in and out the back door again, too. This is something we hadn't seen in at least 15 years. The doorknob started jiggling again. My dad and I were both night owls, and we would sit up late telling ghost stories and just talking, and this would happen often. We'd just be talking away and all of a sudden, the doorknob would start jiggling. We would hear and see it happen. At first, my dad would grab the machete he kept under the couch and a flashlight and walk around the outside of the house and never find anything. After a while, we just ignored it. After a while, we went back to bed and lay there just listening to the frantic pacing until we passed out. It happened the next night too. It was so surreal. I still ask my husband if it really happened, and he always kinda chuckles and reminds me that we barely slept and were so exhausted when we got to our new house that we were all in zombie mode unloading the truck. My dad passed away 6 months later. He was so glad to be out of that damned house. I was just happy he didn't die alone there. My husband and I recently moved back to the city I grew up in. Right after we got back, he insisted we drive by that house. I had the worst feeling of dread over seeing that house again. The new owners changed a lot about the yard and exterior. I would love to know if they've had experiences like we did, but there's nothing anyone could say to get me back in that house to ask them. I mention the house being strange because so many bad things happened there over the years. The house was built in 1900. It had been the farmhouse in the area, so it was there before the other houses. It had a lot of negative energy because so many bad things happened in it over the years. The man who owned it before us had a heart attack in the living room when he was remodeling it. My mother had 2 major strokes in it. I know for sure, according to the neighbor anyway, that those 2 elderly women died in it in the 1960s. Of course, we had several pets die over the years inside the house. The elderly lady's poodle died there too. Aside from all the negative energy that accumulated over the years, my mother had a lot of mental problems. It ran in her family. She was taught as a child that ladies didn't discuss mental illness or show any weakness. She was born in the 1940s, when it was easy to commit a person, especially a woman, to an institution over small things. Plus, she was a narcissist and wouldn't admit to any weaknesses. She yelled, threw fits, and could be abusive towards my father and me. I sometimes wonder if she didn't inadvertently create a poltergeist. Ike. Just one theory about all the stuff that happened there. My friend and I went out stargazing one night. It was a clear night, and the moon was full and really bright. We were looking towards the moon, and then right beside the moon, these 3 lights appeared out of nowhere, forming an upside-down triangle. They were just as bright or slightly brighter than the moon. The top 2 lights faded off fairly quickly, and the bottom light faded shortly after while moving up in a squiggly line. This whole sighting lasted about 15 seconds. If my friend wasn't there, I would be questioning what the heck that was, still am, of course, but seeing as he was there, we both know what we saw. Unreal. My dad works on the road a lot with his sister. He tells this story all the time about how he was driving in a nearby neighborhood one day, and he noticed this thing in the sky hovering right above the rooftops that looked like an oil drum. One side, he said, was black while the other was metallic. The oil drum thing just moved in a straight line away from my dad, rotating about a quarter turn in one direction before turning back and doing a quarter turn in the other direction, which he said he knew because of the way the thing was colored. He got his sister's attention and then spent about a minute watching it, trying to figure out what it was and ruling out all of the obvious answers one by one until it faded out of eyesight. It wasn't until they couldn't see it anymore than they both realized they had cameras hanging from their necks that they could have used to take a video of it. This image is burned in my memory. I'm still not sure if it was a really wild dream, sleepwalking, or it actually happened. So, when I was about 7 or 8, I had a really weird dream where I went outside at night, and there were these kids in the backyard. It was a summer night, and there was a breeze blowing. I clearly remember the warm wind and the grass on my ankles. These kids, I think a boy and a girl, wanted to play, and I never thought of it because I was a kid too and how cool it was to play at night. There was something off about them. They had grayish colored skin and light hair, although still human looking. We played around on the swing set until I looked up in the sky, and I saw this eye. Basically, a giant normal human eye that was a green color and looked like it was just projected on the sky. It blinks once, and when I looked down again, the kids were gone. The next day, my mom swears that either my sister, who had a history of sleepwalking, or me came into the house, after she got home from work late at night. Back in 1999, I was staying in a friend's house for the night with a few other girls. We were standing by her bedroom window smoking, must have been around 11 p.m. Across the road we saw two lads we had been in school with walking towards town. My friend lived in a house about 1.5 miles from town. We banged on the window and shouted, but they didn't look and carried on walking towards town. The next day, we found out that the two lads we had seen had been killed in a car crash on the night we saw them, way before 11 p.m. They had been playing pool in the village pub and decided to drive into town for a drink, and another car smashed into them head-on, about half a mile before my friend's house. When I was 8, I was outside my school in the car rider pickup line, waiting for my parents. We were all sitting in the front courtyard area, and being a bit of a loner, I was sitting there listening to the kids around me talk and play. Across the street was a huge beautiful old oak tree with a massive plume of leaves that were turning colors of orange and red as fall was coming. I was watching the leaves sway in the wind and listening to rising and falling rustle produced. At some point, I think I went into a trance, watching the leaves and listening to the wind as everything seemed to fade away except for the tree and wind. It was then I started hearing a voice. It seemed to come from the sound of leaves rustling but was also separate from them. It was a whisper that seemed to come from a distance. That may sound cliché, but that's the only way I can describe it. It simply said, "A big one is coming." A bit startled and confused, I said I didn't understand. It repeated itself. I said I didn't know what it meant, and it replied, "You will see." And that was the end of it. Everything seemed to come back into focus. I told my parents, who were spiritual, and they were a bit concerned but not alarmed. There had been stories of people in our family who had odd things happen to them. My dad even had a few stories of his own. A week later, I was at my cousin's house at dusk playing with them on the trampoline. I was lying on the trampoline resting after playing for the last few hours while my two cousins were sitting on the edge talking. The wind started as a light breeze but then picked up to a steady gust. It happened again. This time it said, "It's coming. It's coming, and they don't know." I asked who they were and what it was. It replied back, "Too late, it's here." That was the end. About 10 minutes later, the back door swung open to my uncle's trailer, and my aunt started yelling for us to come in. On the news, they were reporting about a tornado that had quickly spawned above a town about 30 minutes north of us. It killed over a dozen people because it spawned so quickly that there was no warning. I've never had that happen again, and I'm not sure I'd want it to. When I was only 4 years old, I became afflicted with night terrors, the full-on, wake-up soaking the bed with sweat and screaming kind. It continued every night for years. I noticed quickly that it followed a pattern. I would be doing normal things with my family. If I looked away or blinked, they'd disappear, I would hear heavy footfalls coming closer, and lastly, I would be chased by what I called the ghost. Not very original, but I was young. Like I said, these continued for years, but I started to notice other things as well. When lying down to sleep, I would hear things moving in the room, but when I would look, no one was there. It kept escalating. I would hear heavy breathing in my ear and even feel the warmth of the breath. I would turn, and there was nothing. Soon, I would wake up from my night terrors, and my blanket would be neatly folded back over my feet. I would ask my parents and brother if they did it, but they all denied it was them. One night I saw a figure walk by my door. It had the body of a human and the head of a dog. The thing was, it was so dark in my room I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. It was something darker than black. It all culminated one night while I again laid there, waiting to sleep. I felt something cold and hard grip my ankles and dragged me off of the foot of my bed. My parent, stereotypically, said I was imagining it all. But I was mad. This thing had the balls to come into my world and try to scare me. I was 14, hopped up on puberty, and ready to kick some ass. I had my night terror like normal, except this time, instead of running, I turned around. I saw this weird little alien thing like a cross between the aliens from Signs and the typical gray men. It looked shocked, and I channeled all my anger at something that was worthy of a man's full wrath. I beat the shit out of that thing. I mean, it was a bloody, pulpy pile of guts when I was done. I never had another night terror, or visit from that thing. I've also been able to lucid dream from that point on. I also have dreams of the future. Usually, a scene that means nothing, but happens around a life-changing event for me. This is all true though I don't know the meaning or cause of it. Maybe someone can explain it, but I'm 28 now and still have no more clue as to what happened.